Welcome, everyone, to the Love, Sex, and Leadership podcast. I'm very excited for today's guest. She's a dear friend. We teach together. She's been in this world of shamanism, mystical awakening, was a midwife for many, many years, and such an amazing spirit with a plethora of knowledge, a heart that really cares genuinely about the people that she serves, and it's a joy to teach alongside her and just to bring this conversation and the essence of what her life really I feel like has been dedicated to into awareness and to really have a deeper conversation. So welcoming Crystal Dawn Morris to the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Erin. It's a joy to be here. I'm looking forward to it.
Hmm. And so, yeah, I'd love to just get diving in and started and, maybe just share a little bit about your journey, especially kind of going from the world of, I know you were a midwife for many years and delivering hundreds of babies and almost I'd love to hear almost how some of that journey as a midwife connected you into the world of shamanism and where you
Mm,
feel like you've been a bridge between worlds. So that's really what I look at as a shamanism, is that they're a bridge between worlds. So you were literally the
absolutely.
first one supporting births coming into this world.
Yeah. Well, I would say, yeah, that's a beautiful question. And it's very interesting because yeah, it really kind of starts at the beginning of my, I would say, deep spiritual journey at 16. I had a like radical, like samadhi kind of experience where I went into bliss state, a oneness state, like for a week. Um, And, I think by day 4, I was kinda like, "Okay, I guess I'm just gonna be in bliss for the rest of my life." I mean, I was 16. And then on day morning of day 8, I was just back in sort of the normal state of consciousness, kind of mystified, like, how could I have just recognize everything as another myself sort of thing? And I was living in Los Angeles at the time, so I was hitchhiking around Los Angeles, trying to go to uglier and uglier places to see if I could still be that blissed out, and I was. And then suddenly it was gone. And so after a couple weeks of grieving over that, not quite understanding how that happened, I was praying and asking like for guidance, and the guidance I got was go find a man and have children. Which wasn't at all what I was expecting. I thought like go to India, study yoga, or I don't know, hitchhike around the US or hike the Himalayas, something, I don't know. Not find a man and have children. But anyway, I followed that guidance, and by the time I was 17, I had a child, so I was on it. And in that experience of being pregnant, giving birth, and breastfeeding, caring for a newborn. I mean, I really I got this taste of somewhat of that taste that I had in that awakening experience of like I have a human being growing inside my body, and like I'm the goddess. And of
Mm.
course, this is in 1972 when my son was born. In fact, his birthday was just a few days ago. Um, I there wasn't people talking like that. People weren't saying, "You're the goddess." So having that experience of the sacredness of that, but also meeting a lot of women when I was pregnant, because my husband and I did a cross country trip. We weren't married yet, but anyway, we did a cross country trip while I was pregnant. And I just met a lot of women who had a lot of fear around pregnancy and birth. And so that sort of planted a seed in me that somehow I wanted to help women at some point know that they were the goddess. And and then when my younger son, he was born in my grandfather's house, across the street from the house where my mom was born. Um, when he started kindergarten, I decided I was going to become a midwife. So I wanted to be legal, so I became a nurse first, so I could become a certified nurse midwife, which was then legal in California where I was living. And and so, like looking back at it now, what I would say is that I was literally praying at the temple door of the goddess, at the, like sitting in front of the yoni every day, many, many yonis. And actually I've been at almost 2,000 births. So I did, that was for like 25 years I was working in women's health, literally at the opening of the uni. And such a blessing to have all those babies come into my hands, and also with each one, I saw each one as the divine child, as I saw my own children
Mm.
when they were born, but also the recognition that every one of us, when we're born, we're all the divine child. So there was also that.
Mhm.
I think that was very much part of my own spiritual journey, and also seeing all the practical sides of it, the fears and the dynamics within relationships and families and all those things that you see. Um, and then kind of along this thing about how I got into shamanism from that was when I went to midwifery school. So that was in 1987. I went to San Francisco and I studied at San Francisco General through UCSF. And my husband and I ended up deciding to split up our relationship, well, shortly after I went to midwifery school. And I was in my first new lover relationship after leaving my marriage. And we were having recreational sex, and I had this incredible Kundalini awakening, which I luckily had some. My mother had a partner who had gone to India. He was a psychiatrist at the time, and was studying Kundalini awakening and seeing how it was being misdiagnosed in the U.S. because people didn't have an understanding about spiritual awakening, and they were telling people they were psychotic when they were literally having Kundalini experiences. So he wrote a book called The Kundalini Experience. His name was Lee Sanella. And I read the rough draft of that when I was 19. So I knew a little bit about Kundalini and a little bit that it had something to do with Tantra. So when I had this incredible Kundalini awakening, I was like, okay, I have to find out more about that. And this was in early 1988. And there wasn't really much out there in modern, in the Western culture. But in '89, Margot Anand's book came out, and also the Charles and Carolyn Mears books came out around Neo Tantra. So I started looking at those and reading those and just trying to understand more about what had happened and what was Kundalini and what did that all mean. But I really quickly recognized that I had a lot of that I needed to do a lot of healing before I was ready to kind of go on the neo tantra path, because I felt like I had too much
Mhm.
wounding around sexuality and boundaries, and I knew I mean, also this is right when codependence was being recognized as an addiction, and I was like, oh, I thought I didn't have any addictions. That's my addiction. So I recognized I needed to do some healing. Like I was like, I am not ready to be in this kind of world yet. So for me, somehow I got directed into the shamanism, and I moved to
Mm.
Sonoma County shortly after that. And this was right kind of in the beginning of the whole circles movement, medicine circles. And I met one of the nurses I worked with at the hospital, where I was a nurse midwife. Um, reached out to me, and it was the beginning of the first Gulf War, and there was a big rally that was put on by some women who had a medicine group, a shamanic circle, a women's circle. And so I went to that, and then I started my own shamanic drumming circle called the Wolf Lodge, and this is back in
Mm.
1992. So this is the beginning of the first Gulf War. And so
Wow.
that kind of launched me into the world of shamanism, which I was still trying to, basically understand what it all was. And but then I ended up studying with Michael Harner. I studied with Michael Harner for 10 years, Foundation of Shamanic Studies. I got involved with a woman who had studied with Angela Sarian, and I did 4 years with her, a women's group in Sonoma County. Ellen Fishburne was her name. And so basically, shamanism then became my main spiritual path for 15 years. I was deep, deep, deep
Mm.
into the shamanic realms and studying with Lakota, the Lakota tradition, Sami tradition, Michael Harner's work, which was kind of what I call core shamanism, which was kind of taking out the cultural thing from, native traditions and how to just do the practices. So
Mhm.
I ended up
Mhm.
becoming a shamanic practitioner and seeing clients, on the side
Mm.
from my midwifery work. And again, I'd say I needed that 15 years of doing that deep inner healing work for myself. I also did therapy earlier on in that first 5 years healing some stuff from my marriage and things. So I think it's important
Mhm.
to do that deep inner work. And for me, shamanism was really great. My mom was a hypnotherapist back when that was radical.
Mhm.
She was a clinical psychologist. So I had been trained to be in altered states of consciousness since I was a young child. So it felt very
Wow.
natural
Wow.
for me to go in and out of these shamanic realms. In those days, Michael Harner's methodology was using a drum or a rattle. He
Mhm.
he didn't think Westerners should be using medicines, which have become super popular now. So
Mhm.
it was really about how to be a disciplined practitioner and how to
Mm.
and his definition of a shaman was somebody, not that you call yourself a shaman, but as a shamanic practitioner, you're there in service to the healing of others, right? To your community.
Mhm.
So that was really a huge part of my work. And as a midwife, I think that's also part of your role. Midwives tend to become kind of catalysts in the community and helping people to recognize how to be more aligned, I'd say, like with their true nature from more of a spiritual perspective. Um,
Yeah, love this. I can feel the depth of experience and knowledge and what life has kind of brought forth for you. I guess the question I have and your thoughts on this is, women giving birth today who maybe haven't had, altered conscious experiences or haven't studied into shamanism and they're just simply going through the process of giving birth. Do you think that in of itself like opens them into like deeper realms of exploration? Because I don't see all mothers really having
yeah.
that kind of
I
code, but do
mean,
you feel like the process
yeah.
itself?
It's definitely a doorway, like you're opening yourself to a doorway for spirit to move through you when you're pregnant. It starts with
Hmm.
conception, right? And pregnancy. And I can't, it's a bit hard for me to say what women's experience is today because I haven't really been in it for, like 18 years. As far
Yeah,
as
yeah.
practicing as a midwife, but I believe that pregnancy and birthing and even lactating, when you're so connected to your child, but even parenting, there's a way that
Mhm.
it opens doorways, right? So because when you have a child, you also end up it brings up stuff about your own childhood, right? Your own, it triggers things in you that suddenly you're like there's a mirror shining on you, like, oh yeah, I remember, how this was for me and how I want to do it differently or better, or I want to do it more like this. And so definitely it's a doorway. Now, the part of the reason I'm not practicing as a midwife anymore was because I really felt like it was becoming more and more difficult to practice midwifery in the healthcare
Mm.
system. And I was working at Kaiser Hospital,
Mhm.
the HMO. And also they were making, it's home births become harder and harder. Uh,
Mhm.
Over
Mhm.
the past 20 years. So I had done home birth early on in my career, but it's hard to do that in this modern era, if you don't want just your whole life, taken over. Um,
Mhm.
so I'm not really sure exactly what women are experiencing in these days, but I know it's gotten harder. I have some midwife friends who are still doing home birth and say it's getting harder, and the government's making it harder, the healthcare system, the insurance, all of that. And I think for women, it's about trusting their bodies. And to
Mm.
me, that's one of the biggest things. Is like when you trust that your body knows how to give birth and and you're surrounded by women, particularly who say, hey, you can do this and your body knows how to do this, then I think it's much easier. Um, and I think it's harder the more we're in our heads and out of, not so connected to our bodies. I think the harder it is for women to surrender in that way because it is a surrendering process, just like spiritual
Mm.
awakening in many ways is a surrendering process. And
Mhm.
the more people are trying to control, and that's what I was seeing when I ended up deciding to leave. Um, was that I just feel like it was all about women were wanting to schedule their inductions or they were wanting to demand C-sections, because they didn't want to have their yonis stretched out because the men wouldn't find them attractive or something, like all kinds of
Mm.
crazy
Mhm.
mental
Mhm.
stuff was happening that I was just like, this is not okay. And
Mhm.
and and it's Yeah, I mean, it takes a certain level of connection to your beingness and your divinity as a creatrix, so to speak, that I don't think
Mhm,
is so much in the culture now. Like when I became a midwife in the 80s, or when I became a nurse in the 80s, in 1984, there was a whole movement for natural childbirth and home birth and birthing centers and having drug-free births, and I think that's not so popular nowadays. I think people are more into wanting to schedule things, and I can't say what it is now, but birthing itself is a sacred experience no matter what happens, and
mhm,
it's a
mhm,
doorway to that kind of a connection. But it's
mhm,
also about how much do you feel supported? And I think one of the
mm,
challenges in these days is that people tend to be more mobile. They're not so much connected in community, even like they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. Um, and I think women need that. Women need that sense of
mm,
community and support, and they need to get that positive reinforcement. And so many, I mean, most women work nowadays. That wasn't true when I was
mhm,
growing up. Even though my mom worked, it was not, it
mhm.
was more common for women to be home and connected with other women in ways that I don't know that they are as much. Although, there's also there are women groups still going on, and there is movements in that, which I think are important.
Mm. Yeah, and one of the things I heard you share, I love this term. It's like these different experiences open the doorway into mystical awakening experiences,
Yeah.
and I'd love to hear your thoughts on where, especially in the realms of leaderships. It's something I talk a lot about on this podcast
Mm,
around how we show up as leaders in these different realms of our soul work in the world. And I feel from what I've heard you share is that there's a few moments for you where the doorway was opened, and as the natural soul inside of you, you took that kind of leadership route. Maybe it was creating something new or listening to something that was beyond what the logic, reason, and understanding was creating. So I'd
yeah.
love to hear some of your take
Yeah.
of where leadership weaves into the moment mystical awakening.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that that is like that's definitely been my experience that I feel like my whole life has been guided by spirit or consciousness, whatever you want to call it. Um and like when right around just after 9/11 I did a vision quest which I had been guided to do through a shamanic journey from these ancient grandmothers. And in that it was a very specific kind of vision quest where I was inside a sweat lodge and, in the dark, basically. You're in the dark for 3 days, no food, no water, just in the dark, sitting there. It's not, the sweat's not going on. You're just sitting in there in the dark. And in that experience, I was told that this was the end of my red rose path, that I wasn't going to be doing this. This had been my whole life for 15 years, and they was like,
Mm.
no, you're going to be doing this other thing, and it's going to be this and this and this. And I was like, what are they talking about? I had no idea what they're talking about and what's being guided, and it didn't make any sense. And then a year later, after that experience, you do a kind of a gratitude sweat for the community that you pay, you cover all the cost of everything for everybody. And I did that. And then about a year later, I was guided to take my first tantra weekend workshop. And then
Mhm.
as soon as I did that, I was like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This thing called tantra. Oh, right. This goes back to 15 years before when I had this Kundalini awakening. Now I'm ready. And it
Mm,
felt like
mhm,
a big step. Like this was stepping from something, even though, there's a shamanic element to tantra as well, of course. Um, and so there was that step, and that took me in a whole direction. And then when I came here to Sedona, actually my oldest granddaughter, I delivered my three oldest grandkids were born at home, and I delivered all of
mm,
them. And
amazing.
after her birth, I came to Sedona because I had a dear shamanic friend who had just bought a house here and moved here. And he was an exorcist, actually. And I came up here to visit him. And on my way here, like as I came down the I-17 into Camp Verde, like God spoke to me in a way that I've had a lot of messages, but this was almost like a booming voice out of the roof of my car, which was very unusual. Like I don't normally have those kind of experiences quite like that. I was kind of like, did my kids rig something up to like spoof me, because it was so weird.
Who is that? What's
And it
going
was
on here?
yeah, exactly. But it was like God spoke and said, "You're moving to Sedona," kind of like out of a movie,
Mhm.
kind of almost. And I was like,
Uh-huh.
"No, no, no way, this is happening." But somehow, within I think 6 or 7 months later, I was literally had moved to Sedona. Like I quit my job,
Mm,
sold my house, bought a house here, and I like arrived, kind of like, "What am I doing in Sedona?" And then very quickly, Margot and I, who hadn't done a teacher's training for 4 years, suddenly decided to start her teacher's training. I started that. I started teaching Tantra here in Sedona, which was kind of radical at that time. It's not so, I don't think it's so radical at this point, but at that time it was, Sedona was spiritual, but very like new agey, upper chakra, definitely nothing to do with money, sex, or power, you know.
mhm, mhm,
And so I was doing that, and then truth basically because of Margot. Margot said she thought I should talk at a sex conference. And I said, Margot, I'm a midwife. I could talk at a midwife conference. I could talk at a shamanic conference, maybe, but a sex conference? I don't think so. And that's how I ended up meeting Baba Diz, who's the founder of ISTA. And then that took me on a whole nother, turn that got me kind of where I am today. And I was working, doing, sexual healing work in his temple at that time, did that for a few years, and eventually started teaching ISTAs. And so I feel like this kind of quality of leadership is something that it's not so much that I, Crystal Dawn, has said I'm going to be a leader. It's more like I, Crystal Dawn, have been kind of shown like this is your next step, and then
mm,
somehow I've kind of ended up in kind of leadership roles, although I don't even know if I kind of actually, I mean, I realize it now, um but at the time it just felt like that was just sort of the next step, and
mhm,
I was just
mhm,
naturally good at kind of organizing people and things. Um and this but recently I've been on this ISTA council for the last couple of years, and I realized, kind of 6 months into that I've avoided executive positions because I
mm,
don't like the projections that happen when you're kind of in a power role, dynamic role. So I've always kind
mhm,
of tried to place, not look too much like a leader. Like I'm just one of you guys. I just happen to be better at organizing things. So I've really been confronted more and more, I would say, with this sense of what it is when you step into a leadership role, when other people really see you in that way. Because I think it does, the dynamics around power. I'm really deep into that kind of inquiry, and how one of the things we talk about in our trainings is around how to become more of a sovereign being. And
mhm,
sovereignty is really a deep spiritual practice. Like it's this
mm,
recognition, from a non-dual Shaiva Tantra perspective. It's the recognition that you are literally the creator, maintainer, and dissolver of every moment of your experience. Not you, the personality, but you, the divine, appearing as this
mhm,
seeming
mhm,
personality. And so that's like super advanced practiced. um and when you're in a particular, when people are feeling hurt, victimized, wounded, not in their power, they can't comprehend that. So it's like how to support people to become more, like, I would say this is my passion now as a leader. How can I support people to wake up and know their own divinity and step more into that sense of being the creator, maintainer, and dissolver of each moment of their life? Um,
mm.
and still have a beautiful, happy, playful, celebratory life, and know that sometimes shit goes down, right? It's not always fun and games. Sometimes it's challenging. Sometimes you have to talk to lawyers for 3 hours,
Yes, exactly. So I'd love to dive into that because, in myself holding a lot of leadership positions and working, a wide variety of different leadership roles through the years, like there's this place of both assumed power as a leader and the kind of give power. And I also have a very strong desire, like part of my intention with this podcast is to support people to remember their own leader inside. And yet any leader has a certain level of projection of, decision making and control that happens upon them as a leader. One of the things that I really want to see in people, underneath me or that I'm supporting is for them to step consciously into their own leadership. And so where do you, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this line between like supporting people to step into leadership, but knowing that when they do, there's also sometimes, if they haven't had that role, like an ego that loves to attach to that role of leader, because if that's something new to them, they're like, oh, well, this feels great, feeling people, you know, beckoning at my call and listening to my orders. And the ego can get a lot fed by that. But ultimately, the real leader and what I'm hearing you share is coming from the deeper listening to spirit.
Yeah.
So where do you feel like your guiding and leadership role is to support people to step in, but to have that learned way of not an egoic leadership, but a soul-centered leadership?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that is a really good question because I think it's not, there's not one, it's not going to be a one, it's not just one answer. And I do think it's different also, and that's changing somewhat, but I think there is a difference between for men and women and also based on your race and your economic status and all those things around privilege. I think one of the things I've learned, there's this group called Right Use of Power, and I took their sort of introductory course a year and a half ago, and it really helped me understand about privilege and about sort of how people can just kind of step into leading, even just on their, like being leaders, whether or not people are asking them to lead or not, or stepping into a role of power, or being more on that top down, like you're going to do it my way, unconsciously, right? Like there's that. So there's so many, there's the subtle layers, and I think for women, at least of my generation, that was a little like there was a more caution around doing that, so you didn't like upset the apple cart, so to speak. And that's changed for sure over, since women's lib and over the last 70 years or so. Um, but it's so there's the unconscious levels of leadership and how we're using our power. Are we using it unconsciously? Are we using it? Who is the benefit for? Like the work around healthy boundaries and and when where am I in service? Like I guess for me, my sort of life's purpose seems to be around service to others. That's just always been sort of a
Mm,
sense that I've always had, that I'm here in service to others. I've known that since I was like 2 years old. Um,
mhm,
and that I've somehow known since I was two. And I don't even know how you know this when you're two, but there was something about love. I'm here in service of love, right? I'm here in service of love, and how
mhm,
to be in
mhm,
service of love, and the recognition, even as a very, very young child, of where a lot of people weren't moving lovingly, right? Like adults,
mhm,
seeing how they weren't treating each other lovingly, weren't treating children lovingly at times. I was in the foster care system for about a year, and I really had like a huge introduction to how people cannot be loving and kind. And I was
mhm,
with my
mhm,
little brother who was a baby at the time, and I was 4, so I felt, like
mm,
I this sense of responsibility very young,
mhm,
and so
mhm,
there's part of this thing around leadership that I guess is really at the top of my mind now with the election and everything, has to do with what are we in service to? Are we in service to the well-being of the majority? Are we in service to specific groups that we really have passion for? Are we in service to our own aggrandizement? Like where is the service? Where is the attachment? Where is the longing? Where is the energy want to flow? And and I think that takes a self-inquiry process, and
mhm,
particularly if you're
mhm,
kind of find yourself in a role of leadership and you're not used to it, you may not have even thought about those things, right? And um I don't know that people really, that these kind of things are discussed like really clearly and publicly, like, okay, what is your, purpose of being a leader? Like even in politics, I
mm,
don't think we really talk about um what kind of leaders do we want to have, leading our country? Like where are their interests? Where are their what is their vision for the greater good? Versus look
mhm,
at me, I'm great. Um, so
mhm,
I think that this whole thing around leadership is really about looking deeply into what is power, what are the dynamics of power. I know for myself, I'm very similar to what you're saying. My idea is that I want everyone to feel their own sovereignty, so they ultimately there's a sense that I am leading my life. Like I'm letting life lead. It's not even I'm leading my life, but life is leading me, and I'm the one who's
Hmm.
following, choosing. And even if I'm following somebody else, I know that I'm at choice. I'm not just doing it blindly. And I think that's one of my um, questions around social media, as I feel like right now, sometimes it just feels like, someone who's like these influencers, comes out with something and suddenly a whole movement starts. And I'm not always clear if people really are a choice or they're just following the trend because it's cool. I don't know. This is one of my questions
Hmm.
around the whole social media movement, and is it in service to people being feeling empowered or in line with their own guidance versus just blindly following whatever is cool at the moment.
Well, and what I hear in that, and I think it's also a good segue, is this level of accountability as a leader, because especially in social media where people are, they're directing people's attention, they're giving them these offers. And what I see a lot is if someone gets really good at marketing and they're good at, drawing people into something, is what they're drawing them into just benefiting their pocketbooks, or is it benefiting, the service of the souls of the individuals that are there? Is it a personality driven leadership model that's just trying to feed this technocratic world that we live in? Or is the leadership coming from a place of, hey, I want to empower you to be greater? And this comes into a place around accountability as a leader, accountability of
Yeah,
how we show up with this God-given skills that are in there. And this is something I've been reflecting upon a lot recently, is like there are certain skills that I've gained in this life of, even military years, and I know how to lead people, I know how to guide people, I know how to show up as a strong facilitator. And I recognize that with that is a certain level of responsibility of to be inside my own integrity. So I'd love to hear how, and
yeah,
I know you have a passion with this as well, really, with some of the things inside of the ISTA world, but how accountability plays into play with leadership and showing up in these roles of serving and guiding others.
yeah. Yeah, and I think that this question around integrity, like to me, this is a really huge one. Like how, and what does even integrity mean, right? Like what is integrity? How am I integrating myself? What are my personal values? How do I want to move in the world? Do I notice if when I'm compromising integrity, wanting to be surrounded? I think part of the beauty of community is having people around you that uh, can say something like, "Hey, I'm noticing it's something seems a little off here." I think we need we need people to also have our backs and know and help us recognize, because often when we're going into more like the shadow aspects of power, often we're blind to it in the moment. It doesn't always obvious to us. And that's why we need our peers to also help us to see, hey, call us to attention. Um,
Hmm.
so, and I don't know how much integrity, like I think, yeah, like this whole thing around marketing, like I'm a terrible marketer. I'm back in the olden days when it was like putting up flyers and calling your friends and saying, "Come over for this." Yeah, I was good at that, but like the whole
Come,
social
come.
media thing, I just like, I can't deal with it. But still seems to be working out okay. But I rely on other people mostly for that. But partly because I feel like for me, I'm very much an old school kind of person. I really like that old, personal, relationship, versus,
Hmm. Hmm.
like I find it really even hard to imagine that a 20 something can be an social influencer with, hundreds of thousands of followers. And I'm like, yeah, sure, they obviously know something, and clearly they're good marketers, but I mean, how much wisdom do they really have at 20, whatever? Um, and it just makes me question, like, what is this
Hmm.
about? And and oftentimes I think this whole influencer thing is around money. Like, look, I'm successful, I'm making this much money, I'm selling this many whatevers. Um, versus and I mean, capitalism. I mean, I've really been in this question recently about capitalism, and there are certain aspects of capitalism that I think, like it can be inspiring. You get an idea, a vision for something, and you can go out there and create it. But at the same time, is there a way to have more of a conscious capitalism where you can say, hey, but I'm doing this because it will benefit people, not just, to fill my own pocket. Um,
Hmm.
and also how capitalism, if it just comes down to the bottom line of giving your shareholders, profit, is that is that really what we want to spread? And it's spread all over the fucking planet, excuse my f. It's just spread everywhere. I mean, I was talking to a friend a couple days ago about China, who's a communist country, is now got entrepreneurs. It's become capitalistic in many ways. So it's just interesting how capitalism has spread all over the planet. Everybody's into it, but I don't necessarily think that it's a very conscious, monetary system. And again, and as
Hmm.
a child, that I came to my, sort of adulthood in the 70s, in the 70s, we had this vision that we are going to make the world a better place. There was the beginning, the first Earth Day happened when I was a freshman in high school. We're going to make the planet better. We're going to end poverty and end pollution and, end war and all the things. And as I'm going to be 70 in a couple of months, and I'm like going, I don't know. I don't think we did that good of a job. I feel like somehow the world is kind of taking a weird turn. And as somebody who I feel like I've devoted my life to wanting to help people become more aware, more awake, more responsible, more have more integrity, be, creating more love in the world. Also to support people to have freedom as well. Um, and yet, and I do think that's happening. I think there is a raising of consciousness. However, there still seems to be a lot of delusion out there, and that's kind of a question for me, is like, what do I need, in my last few years of productivity, so to speak, what am I going
Hmm.
to do to really, help people to get more clarity? And I mean, I'm working
Hmm.
on it within myself, like every day. It's not
Hmm.
something you get to and then it's done. It's a practice, right?
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
um and how do you keep spreading that, because I think to be response able means, am I able to respond in a loving, compassionate, caring way in each moment as much as possible? And I'm a
Hmm.
human being, and sometimes, I won't do it the best. And and particularly in a world where there's a lot of projection, right? There's a lot of
Hmm.
projection,
Hmm.
there's a lot of assumption. Sometimes I'm mystified by how much opinions are out there, and particularly and you have all these friggin' apps on this device, which sometimes feels like the bane of my existence. Like I literally go to bed and I clear all my messages and wake up to 150 opinions of people that I'm supposed to now deal with. And like, really? Do we really have to have this much to
Yeah.
say about every little thing? So I don't know. I'm finding just, and it's partly probably because the spiritual practice I'm doing right now is really about noticing these subtle levels of awareness. But I can feel this part of me that has some resistance to all the egoic, you know, stuff going on. Just in the communities that I'm involved in, not even in the whole world, because I don't follow the global things that much.
Yeah. And I'd love to dive deeper into this place of where, capitalism meets mystical awakening, kind of meets spiritual practice, because I see a lot of mystical spiritual teachers, in many ways, both of us are that. And there almost not needs to be, but be a certain level of awareness of being an entrepreneur and making offerings and bringing yourself out into the world. And where is that level of the conscious capitalism? And just as you're saying, like, can we, in this kind of conscious capitalism, or conscious entrepreneurship, still be able to bring in the deeper levels of the spiritual practices to actually see, even in where money and power especially are being woven in, can we see that each of these moments is actually the God taking form inside these actions, even in the moments when you're like, oh, this is like feels horrific, like recognizing even in those times that God can be there. And I'd love to, in your practices, especially maybe some of the recent ones you're doing, like where you feel like you're able to meet this dance of capitalism meeting mystical awakening.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting because I'm in this deep inquiry. I feel like I'm at this point in my life where I've been working really hard the last couple of years, especially since I got on the council, and there's a lot been going on within as to the organization that we're both a part of. And then there's something about turning 70, which I'm actually going to have a call with a friend, Lori Handlers, and to talk to her about it, because I can feel it's triggering something in me. And I don't think I've ever really felt like a resistance to, a number. But there's something about turning 70 that I can feel like, oh, there's something about that is, making me question, like, what am I doing with, my life? My younger brother is retired, and I'm like, am I going to just keep, and I'm also recognizing this attachment to being a doer, and capitalism really is great when you're attached to the doerness of yourself. And yet I think on this level, I'm really, and this is part of my kind of resistance to answering all these messages, is that on the spiritual level, I'm just wanting to sit and be, watch my birds that come to feed off my bird feeders, and walk around my neighborhood, hike up in the rocks. And there's something very quiet and still, and just sort of the awe and wonder of nature, and I think simplicity, like I'm wanting more simplicity. And at the same time, I'm recognizing when you're in these leadership kind of roles, it's almost they don't really fit. Simplicity and leadership sometimes feel like they're at odds with each other. And there's also this piece of like I'm not rich by any means, but I make a reasonable living, and I have a certain level of comfort, and I'm aware of, getting older, and wanting to find how am I going to maintain a certain level of living without having to work as much. And at the same time, yeah, I mean, I love this idea of I haven't had a community around me to talk around stuff around, like, consciously. I love this conscious entrepreneurship, like this idea of conscious
Mm.
entrepreneurship, and how, like, even, it's like, there's so many questions around, like, travel. Travel's not so good for the environment. It's not so, jets fuel in the air is not really good for our biosphere. And yet, like, I'm one of those people who's flying around. And so there's just these kind of questions around how
Mm-hmm.
to create more alignment and easefulness, and giving our gifts and doing it in a way that's in service to the world. And and that doesn't mean it's also not in service to ourselves. I think that's important, that we're aligned to where it's also supporting our own life. We can't just be like, sacrificing constantly. um and it seems it's complicated. It's not just seems complicated. I think it is complicated, um in a way that's so different. When I think about my relatives when I was growing up, they lived in a lot. My mother's family lived in southeastern Oklahoma, and they were like farmers, right? They were like, they didn't leave their, they grew up in the same in the same little area. They lived on the same land. They went to the same church. They, had the same friends and family around them all the time. It was such a different life. They could literally sit out and rock on the porch for hours, staring off into the distance. They were not say they were meditating, but they were probably in more of a meditative state than many, you know, meditators today. And life had a certain quality of simplicity and ease that I think is even hard to create. I know right now with your community that you're creating there in Portugal, there's this idea of we're going to create this simplicity and easefulness, and have this place where we can come and be in nature with people, and have ease and peace. And at the same time, the world's still going on, and it feels like it keeps getting faster and faster. So I'm just sitting in that, trying to find where's
Mm,
my place in that reality. Particularly as I feel like I'm entering sort of this new phase of my life where I'm thinking I want to slow down, I want to do less, I want to still have
mhm,
an impact, I still want to support people. I feel like there's something about getting older where I feel like I've harvested a lifetime of experience, right? I've learned a lot. And so how do you
mm,
share that?
mhm,
And at the same time, I don't feel like I necessarily want to always monetize everything either. Sometimes I just like to hang out with people, and if they ask me a question, I can offer, what I
mhm,
have to say. But it's not necessarily I have to have a course on it or a class on it or, a
mm,
satsang or whatever the thing is. Um, and I don't and there's not so many places like where you can just do that. I don't know. It's a question. I feel like it's we're in a different era now that I'm still trying to sort of understand my place at this point in my life because I
mhm,
feel like I'm in a transition
mhm,
period.
yeah. No, I'm sure there's a lot that can relate to that, and I also hear the genuine, and I feel it in who you are as a being to really give back to this younger generation. And I just as it's just coming into my awareness. But if there was a new baby being born, today or tomorrow, and you had a 2 or 3 minute period to kind of speak directly to the soul of that child and share
Mm,
a few
mm,
nuggets of wisdom, and you're 70 years being in this human flesh suit and as a soul incarnate and having your spiritual journey, what would be a few of those nuggets of wisdom you'd share
mm,
to that newborn who's just
yeah.
about to take their journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think the word that came up for me was savor. It's like savoring it. Like
Hmm.
there's a word in Sanskrit called chamatkara, which is like awe and wonder. And I love being around little kids,
Hmm.
because they have this awe and wonder. They have this chamatkara that is really like just everything. You walk outside and the leaves are turning colors and you're like, you see a worm crawling. Oh my gosh, look at it go. Like everything has this awe and wonder, and that often we lose that as we get older. So I would say savoring life in every moment, no matter what it looks like,
Hmm.
and and
Hmm.
and maintaining your connection to the awe and wonder that you have as a young child throughout your life. Like I
Hmm.
feel like somehow I've been able to do that. Like I've maintained that sense of awe and wonder, and I really do savor life. And it's funny because there was a period when my kids were in school age that I tried really hard. I spent like a year trying to be like a normal mom and like join the PTA and do all the normal mom stuff. And then after about a year, maybe it wasn't even a year, maybe it was like 6 months, I was just like, I don't think I can pull it off. And so I told my kids, I've tried really hard to be a normal mom, but I don't think I can pull it off. And they're like, good mom, we're happy. Just be yourself. Um, and and I think there's something about that. Like so often we're told that when you have to grow up and be serious and plan everything and you try to control and it's just my experience of life is it's not like that. Like life, the
Hmm.
more that you can just stay in that on wonder, savor things as they emerge, and part of it also, I'd say maybe one of the biggest things I've learned in the last few years through the spiritual, sort of the non-dual Shiva path, is really enjoying the moments when things are dissolving, like completions. Like I love completions. It's like when those moments when everything is dissolving away. Because where does it dissolve away to? To your divine nature. So to be able to rest in
Hmm.
those moments when things are dissolving, because there's a space, and this is something I feel, yeah, this is probably one thing I really would like to get out there in my last few years of being out there in the world, is for people to really learn how to enjoy the moments when you dissolve back into your true nature and just rest there, even if it's for one
Hmm.
breath, because there's an
Hmm.
ease and there's like in that moment you're whole and complete. we've
mm,
the sort of the Western capitalist model is so much you got to get out there and prove yourself and get more and get more and do better. But actually, every moment when that moment dissolves, you dissolve back into your wholeness, back into your divinity, back into
mhm,
that which is whole and complete. And if you can have that experience, even just a couple times in a day of like, oh, right, I'm whole and complete. Let me just remember that.
mm,
Like,
mhm,
that is so
mhm,
nourishing to every part of your being. And also, I think people love when they're around somebody who feels that, like they can feel that in
mm,
you. Like, there's something about that person. When I'm around them, I can just relax into myself. And
mhm, mhm,
and I guess I would love to see us have more leaders, more public figures that have that quality. Um, and I
mhm.
don't see a whole lot of that sort of out there in the big public arenas. Um,
Well, it's something I honor and appreciate about you. I feel like you have a deep childlike wonder, and spending time with you and teaching alongside you. There's a beautiful capacity to be in that wonder and to express in that way. It's one of the things I really appreciate about who you are as a being.
Thank you, Erin.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah.
and I think there's something about there's something about aging. I think because I think we're still in a very much of a youthful worshiping culture, and I would like to see
Mm,
people as they're aging to be able to do that with a joyfulness. Like there's nothing wrong with growing
mhm,
older, right? It doesn't mean you're old, but there's something about the aging process. With experience comes hopefully comes some wisdom, and how to do that in a way with grace and ease, and also that ability to just be to know your wholeness and to be able to rest in yourself, like the rest in yourself quality. There's something about that quality of just being in an easeful rest, that I think
yeah.
I didn't appreciate it when I was seeing it in my relatives as a child. I thought it was boring as I kind of like, what are they doing? They're just sitting out there doing nothing for an hour. What's happening? Why don't we do something? But as I look back on it now, I was like, oh, they were just resting in the beingness of, what is
Mm,
without need to be busy.
mhm,
And
mhm,
I would like to see more of that quality of that kind of down, now we know from being, the whole trauma informed thing that down regulation is so important to our nervous system, so important for our health and well-being. And I think that there's a quality there that I would like to see, I don't know how, it's like, how do you promote doing nothing and resting in your nature? Um, but there's something about I would love to see people have more of an appreciation for that quality, and
mhm, mhm,
how to, and again, it's I think what I'm learning, one of the things I'm really learning around this really subtle kind of work is that it's not about what it looks like, it's about where it's coming from. And it's actually those moments where of deep stillness and quiet, and it's not even, you could be having a moment of stillness internally while you're seemingly chopping vegetables or chopping wood or
mhm,
whatever.
mhm,
But it's that quality of that inner, stillness, um, that I think people are longing for in our culture.
mhm,
And so this is the
mhm,
thing. I'm really kind of in an inquiry. Like I'm recognizing,
mm,
even I just taught a level one, ISTA level one, in Minnesota was the first one. And I grew up in the Midwest and I love Midwesterners. And but I recognize, okay, how do I even get people to slow down more, create more spaciousness, more easefulness? Um,
mm, mhm,
and I'm not a slowed down I tend to be a highly, like I have a lot of energy. I have a lot of, Shakti. And but I'm also really recognizing like there is a place for that easeful, quiet stillness of just landing and being that
mm,
has
mm,
value. And yet I think that value hasn't really been very well recognized in this kind of postmodern, very fast-paced culture that
Mhm.
I like going fast, and I'm finding it like almost too much for my nervous system sometimes. So I think
Yep.
there's,
Yep.
this is the inquiry, like the place where you are in Portugal. There was something about that land, and just the valley there and the village nearby that has a quiet, restful, easeful, slowed downness that is very, for me, felt very seductive. Like, yes, the little creek
Mm,
moving
mhm,
through, and
mhm,
um, there's something about land, the earth, right? The element of earth that helps us to ground. I think that's partly why I'm living in Sedona, because there's
mm,
this rock, this kind of dense rocket that was at the bottom of a inland sea for, hundreds of thousands of years, that holds a certain quality of the earthiness, um,
mhm,
that is very grounding for me. I love it here.
mhm, mm. Yeah, beautiful. The last kind of inquiry I'd love to have you speak into. So I've had on this show, some older beings, young souls. Laurie Handlers was here, Margot Renan was here, and we talked about sexuality on this podcast. And what I often see in not necessarily any of the three of you, but women, especially sometimes as they get older, there's this mindset of like, oh, I can't be juicy, I can't be sexy, I can't be any of that. And what I experience and all three of you and several other women I know of similar age, there's this aliveness and juiciness and sexuality that still moves and vibrates through your being. So what are some of the words or advice or words of wisdom you might
Mm,
share, especially to those individuals the same age as you might be
mm,
struggling with their own sexuality and staying juicy
mm.
and alive?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question. Because what I meet, there's quite a lot of women that I'm around with, and, ISTA and participants who come to trainings, particularly women who are perimenopausal. And that was, I remember that quite well when I went through that period in actually, I had my first hot flash right after I found out my son's partner was pregnant when I was
Mm,
43. And I actually had my very last period literally like 2 weeks before I moved to Sedona. So like my whole time in Sedona, which is almost 20 years, I've been menopausal. And
mhm,
and so I know that that transition is often challenging for women, both hormonally, emotionally. And also, I mean, my own experience was, even though I looked quite young for my age, so it wasn't like men thought I was menopausal, but they do respond. The hormones do affect how there was, there's a play relating to the hormonal body. And so I think it's partly to really, I think, staying in touch with your life force energy, your sexual energy, the kundalini energy, whatever you want to call it, and how to keep circulating that. Like I would say, I'm more orgasmic than I've ever been. Yeah, I mean, I'm very orgasmic. My life is very orgasmic. I have a lover, but he lives like 1,000 miles away. I don't see him very often. I wouldn't mind having some other lovers around that were a little more geographically available. Um, I'm fortunate in that I still feel like my yoni is very juicy. But I think partly it has to do with circulating that life force energy. And I think there's a lot of it has to do with our minds. Like
mm,
the word in the Sanskrit is the vikalpa. Like if I have a vikalpa that says if I'm not menstruating, somehow I'm no longer sexy or juicy or attractive, that belief will affect, how I present myself and how people respond to me. Versus if I'm like, no,
mhm,
I am the divine goddess, no matter what I look like, and no matter how old I
mhm,
am, and find the things that keep feeding that life force energy in me, like dance. Like for me, dance is a big one. Being out in nature is a big one. Just being, savoring, right? I was saying about the savoring piece, loving the body, doing things that make the body feel loved. And I
mhm,
think for women, like to me, I don't feel, yeah, I mean, still feel very sexual. Like I feel like I'm a very sexual being, even though I'm not having intercourse like very often. But for me, it's not even about that. It's like I would say my spiritual practice is making love with life in every moment. right? Like, so for me, it's
Mm,
like, how do I
mhm,
meet each moment from that kind of juicy, Shakti kind of place of like, how am I going to make love to this moment? And some of those
mm,
moments are easier than others, but like years, quite a long time ago now, maybe 10 years ago or more. It was tax season, and I was like, I'm making love to my taxes. That's going to be my goal. How do I make love to my taxes? And I thought, wow, okay, Crystal, like I like to set challenges for myself, and I had the most fun doing my taxes. Like it was like a detective novel, and I was like finding where did the money come from and where did it go and who did it benefit and what happened, and it became really fun. So I think part
mm,
of it is like if you think about every moment as an opportunity to make love, and for me, especially if it's something challenging, like if a challenge comes into
mhm,
your life, okay, how do I make love to that challenge? Um,
mm,
and find a
mhm,
way to really bring that compassion, bring the love, bring the playfulness, bring the
mm,
sensuality. Um, for me, that's my approach. And I actually enjoy when I get challenges. Not that I'm asking for a whole lot of challenges, but when challenges arise, I actually kind of get excited, like, oh, here's something that's still kind of challenging for me. Um,
mhm,
so I
mhm,
think it's not too because I think sometimes we get caught up in a story of like it has to look like it used to. And if I know myself as a sexual
mm,
being and it looks like this, then that can be challenging. Like I spend most of my life in relationships and I haven't really been in a committed long-term like living together relationships for 20 years. And yet,
mm,
yeah, I was like, okay, well, this is interesting. It's not what I expected. And I'm going with the flow. So how to
mhm,
keep,
mhm,
it's a way of contextualizing things so that they keep the life force flowing and
mm,
excited and juicy and interactive. Um, and it's not, again, I really want to stress this thing of that we so much of marketing these days is about what it looks like. And if it's not so much about what it looks like, but about where it's coming from. If I'm making love to life in
mm.
every moment, then I'm just having sex all the time. Right? Even though it looks like I'm, doing other stuff. Like it's all about me making love with life. Versus if I have an idea that if I don't have a man in my bed or a lover in my bed every day, that somehow I'm not sexy, then I'm gonna have a different experience.
So if you see the woman ecstatically dancing in the airport, you'll know she's Crystal Dawn or someone that knows her.
Exactly. That's one of
Thank
my
you
favorite things.
for all of this.
It's
I
been
just yeah, I
great.
really appreciate you. I'm very grateful for our friendship. I'm glad that we get to teach together. Those of you that like to come join, one of the things we're doing together will be in Roatan in June and teaching a Live in Level 1 with ISTA, and end
Yeah,
of August in Seattle. We'll be doing a Live in Level 1
yeah,
there as well. So um,
yeah. I'm looking
thank you
forward
for
to it.
your presence, for your joy, for your aliveness, for the journey you bring into this world and all the lives that you've impacted along the way. I can really I honor you and I appreciate you a lot. Thank you for being in my life.
Mhm. Thank you, Erin, and thank you for doing these podcasts and and addressing these topics, which are really important topics. And it's an honor to be on your show and sending you much love. And yeah, it's just been a blessing to be here. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
you're very welcome. Thank you, everyone. This has been another great episode here at Love, Sex, and Leadership. And be sure, if you're watching this on YouTube, to subscribe and follow us. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at any time up through the website. Thank you all and have a beautiful day.
Hi.